Welcome to the About Sex podcast. I'm Joshua Skirtu, and with me, as always, is Angela Skirtu.
Hi.
Hi. How are you, Angela?
I'm a little sick, so I'm going to talk very sultry to everybody.
Sultry.
I said slow. I would practice sultry the whole time, too.
You've been practicing sultry?
Sultry.
Yeah,
Yep.
we both have colds.
So
You're going to get it, by the way. Sorry.
Oh, no.
And that's our guest today is Angela Schubert.
That's right.
Hi, Angela.
Hi.
You are a sex therapist. Where did it go? Oh, no. It locked itself
Well,
again.
while you're doing that, I'll tell everybody I'm a licensed marriage therapist and an AASEC certified sex therapist.
And Angela Schubert is a PhD in counseling education and supervision, and a master's degree in mental health counseling from the University of Missouri St. Louis. She received a gender studies certificate in 2015 from University of Missouri St. Louis, and she did her undergrad work in Illinois College. She is a sex researcher and all this other stuff. I'm not going to read it all.
Hey, I'm kind of interested. What's the gender certification all
what
about?
Is that?
Right away. Wait, not even on the topic list. I'm like, what's that?
Like, we have genders. What is that?
We have gender.
So University of Missouri St. Louis, they offer a certificate to to learn more about women and gender, and essentially it is understanding the origin, the pedagogy of women's studies and gender studies.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it looks not only at Western civilizations, but it also looks at international civilizations. So I dug it, but I didn't know it existed until I was about to graduate.
Oh, no.
So I took the certificate instead of the degree.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that always the same way? Like, I was an English major, and I was like, oh, yeah, computers exist. I should have done
and
that.
And everybody speaks English.
Yeah.
And everybody speaks English. Now I have a degree in it. I also speak good.
Exactly right. So why are women important to learn about?
Yeah.
Well,
Tell us more.
I don't
Tell
know.
us more.
Well, I think the study of women, especially in communities or in tribes, in social systems, there's just a varied degree of gender role expectations. So I was intrigued by it because I grew up as a Westerner, so I know what gender role looks like in my social culture, but I don't know what it looks like for people around the world. And I've noticed that from the research that I've done, and including all of the degrees, all of those tracks that I ever went on, they have were predominantly created by white males. So
Hi. I'm
hello,
one
white
of those.
males.
I don't know if you personally did it, but
So I'd be perfect for it.
Yeah. Right.
I could write
So
something.
everything
I
is
do have a
written
degree in English.
on your behalf.
I see. So always women in relation to men, white men.
Well, they
Right.
say if you're going to rule the world, you have to write all the history books from your perspective.
From your
Yeah.
perspective.
That's
Like,
true.
we were the
Right.
good guys. Everybody else was the baddies.
Right. Yeah. And and the history books and all that say so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We won.
Right. Right. So the male sort of model is the framework or the baseline for everybody else to be evaluated.
Right.
So you're abnormal then if you're not one of those two
Well,
things.
I am a lady. I'm a cis female.
She's a lady.
She's a lady. Well, so you're also here to talk about aging. Yes?
Yeah, that's your research. That's what you're focused on in your research, right?
I did.
Yeah. So what does
Yeah.
that involve in aging?
Well, so I was.
Do old people have sex?
Yeah, they do.
They do.
They do.
No way.
They do. They do. The description just changes, right?
Yeah.
So it's not what you would typically believe to be between two people at a younger age. It just varies. The definition shifts. You have to reinvent that process for you, and a lot of it comes from within first. So if you have this belief that you're always supposed to have it, missionary style, and you're always supposed to engage, and you're always supposed to have an erection, and you're always supposed to get excited.
And mutual
And you're always supposed to do it in the
orgasms
dark.
And everybody's, yes, and everything
You're
is
never
in
allowed to do it in the light.
dark. Then you...
Yeah, but then you might trip and fall and you'll be like, my hip.
That's
Right.
how you
You know
fall
what?
in. It's an
Yeah.
accident
Oh.
that repeats itself over and over again.
That's sex.
That's sex.
That's
Oh,
sex.
yeah.
Right. And then you jump up and down and you don't get pregnant.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Oh, that works to get the sperm out.
Right.
Oh,
right.
that's
Well,
so
Up
smart.
and
Well,
down.
after your 60s, I'm assuming you can't get pregnant.
Well, actually, I think there are people who've
No
gotten
way.
pregnant. I think in Britain there was an older woman. I think she was around 65, and I believe she had twins.
Yep. Yeah, she did.
It's time
Yeah.
to start. That's family planning right there.
It depends.
It's like, I'm 65.
It
Time
does
to retire
depend.
and have 2 children.
It does depend.
After menopause, though, it does end.
Yeah.
But some women
But
have
some women
menopause
have it
later.
Huh.
So
Right.
that lady did.
right.
Wow.
That's a real surprise
I
birth,
know.
right?
Woohoo. Way to go,
Yeah.
lady. She wanted babies.
Well, I don't know if she had planned to do that, I guess.
She did. She wanted to. Yeah.
She wanted it. She planned
cool.
it. Wow.
Yeah.
How
So
about-
my interest in aging sexuality
Mm-hmm.
was it began when I worked at the nursing home. Is it okay to say masturbate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can say
Oh,
masturbate.
okay.
Just
So,
the cuss words we
but
try
no
to avoid.
curse words. Okay,
That's
I
all.
need to
That's funny.
know my
You can
bad.
say
No, you're
masturbate.
fine.
You can say cunnilingus.
No,
You
no,
can
no.
say anal sex. We
Oh.
won't even think about
Yeah.
those.
Masturbation is not a bad word.
They're not
Okay.
bad
At all.
words.
That's
Those
wonderful.
are home words.
Those are clinical terms.
Home words.
I want
clinical
them to be
terms
that
are okay.
casual that anybody
No
can
matter
talk
what,
about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So I started off trying to make my way through undergrad, and I was able to acquire a job at the nursing home as a CNA.
Mm-hmm.
And my first experience with another person having sex who was not around my age group was a woman who more than likely has passed since then.
Mm-hmm.
I walked into her room, as we normally do, and she was masturbating in the bed. And I didn't
Wait,
want...
the door was just wide open?
No. I opened up the door.
Did you knock?
You do one knock and you
okay.
open in. There
Yeah.
aren't any steadfast rules about this. You
Yeah.
don't...
And they don't have a lock on their door.
They do not have any locks on their door. In fact, their privacy is quite limited.
Yeah.
But so she was masturbating. We'll call her Wilma, and so Wilma, was having fun with herself, and so I was going to respect that. I walked out, and when I walked out, I maybe in the 20-something-year-old that I am at the time, I was like, "Oh, Wilma was just masturbating. Like, how exciting is that?" And oh no, we
Wait.
would never do it. No, and
Who said that?
The charge nurse walked down to Wilma's room,
Why is that
got
any
her
of her
out
business?
of her bed,
Oh,
and brought her into the community space
like a child.
like a child.
Oh, like a shamed woman being stoned.
Yeah, yeah,
Sounds
yeah.
horrible.
And so that was it for me. I knew that there was something weird about
That's a
that.
toxic environment right there.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I've heard stories about like even like men who are there, like they're not allowed to have access to any pornography, no magazines or anything like that.
I think there's a big belief that you're not supposed to, and it probably depends on what nursing home you go into. But there's normally not even somebody to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There's not somebody from PR or HR or whoever's trying to do that. Welcome to this new nursing home.
Right.
Here
It's
is
not on
your
the list of
bathroom.
rules
Here's
or-
your shower.
Here's where you can have sex.
Here's where you can have sex. Here is
Do
where
they
you
have
can
a place
pick up
they can
porn.
have sex?
Right. Well,
Like,
in the
yeah.
research that I did, no, one nursing home there was a family room that maybe a family member who wasn't in the nursing room could go to. So I coined it the boom boom room because they said if somebody wanted to have sex, they could have sex in there. And the other place, several other places that I researched, no, absolutely not. There's no specific room. Most rooms are occupied by a stranger. If they have the money to get a single room, they still have limitations with privacy and people coming in and out all the time.
Yeah. That's terrible.
I know it.
Like,
So
it
it
doesn't matter
makes for
how-
a great,
yeah.
the end of your life.
Yeah. You get somebody chasing you around like an overbearing mother trying
Yeah.
to stop you from touching yourself.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
Oh
more
no,
than likely
because you
somebody
might
even
harm
younger.
yourself
Yeah.
somehow.
Right.
No,
It's-
orgasms
So
are great.
retarded.
You're not supposed to touch. You're not supposed to feel. You're not supposed to have
You're not
any
supposed to date.
interest.
I mean, like, let's be honest, you only have so many years left. Why wouldn't you want to date and bang as much as you could?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I want to do with my end of years.
Yeah, what else are you going to do?
What else are you gonna do?
You have so much time on your hands
do?
once you're
No, it's
retired.
true.
Like,
Right.
what are you gonna do?
Yeah, and then
Chase the ladies around.
You need sex to
know.
feel. I don't know. It's a need. I think it's like a human right to me. Like,
Well,
it
the
doesn't
World
seem
Health
like-
Organization
you.
does say it's a human right.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you're
if
not
they
alone.
said it is, then it must be
Right.
true.
right.
Well, so what would happen then? Like, if people did want to have sex, did they ever ask the people about it, or would they just keep it to themselves? Or
So if they're married, then they more than likely share a room. They have been known to verbalize some concerns, some interests, like maybe please have some privacy 10 minutes before you put us down, or 10 minutes before you wake us up in the morning, because they may be immobile for whatever reason. So then they work something out, but you have to have a lot of courage to ask a stranger
To give you privacy.
to
so you
give
can
you
have sex.
privacy so you can, kiss
sex with
or
your
fondle or hug
Yeah.
or
Be intimate.
be
in any way.
intimate in
Yeah.
any way. But otherwise, the majority of the nursing homes that I've gone to, they don't have anything set up. They don't ask the questions. And then something that I found from my research is that when you are going into when you go to a nursing home, and it's not yours, right? It's not your house.
Right.
So you're a guest in somebody's home. How likely are you going
As
to
a resident?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's your home. At that
Right.
point, if you're a resident, that's your home.
Well, you would hope that.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of underlying belief, like, well, I couldn't do that. What if they came in? What if they found out?
It's like you're a
Is
prisoner.
that allowed? So they asked me these questions. I'm like, well, you've lived here for 5 or 6 years. You've never asked?
They
No.
haven't. No.
And nobody's ever come forth to offer that conversation.
Well, they need to. Like, really.
Oh yeah,
Like, they need to have the right to do what they want with their body. Like, doesn't matter how old you are.
right. We were talking about stories, and talking about so I call him George. He super swell guy. He got rid of all of his porn before he went to the nursing home. By no means was he didn't want, he's going into somebody else's home.
Right.
So he didn't want to bring that, thinking that they would take it away, or they would find him out, or they would do whatever. And so slowly he realized that he needed that.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a partner. He didn't have a way to, that was how he enjoyed himself and enjoyed his private time. And so he bought one. And then one became two.
Of course.
And two became three.
Three became a collection.
Right, and
Yeah.
he has a collection, but he didn't know. He got the courage before he knew whether or not it was appropriate to have, or somebody would punish him. And
Punish an adult.
punish
yeah,
him.
why would
right.
why would an adult
Right.
need to be
You
punished?
try to punish me as an adult, you will have a problem.
or discipline in any
Like,
way.
really.
Right.
Like, yeah, if you're the cops and I'm breaking a law, yeah,
Sure.
they can punish me.
Right.
Other than that, mind your own business.
But you've never
Good
had these
Lord.
conversations before.
No,
People don't talk about sex,
yeah.
on a regular basis. And
We do.
as 70-year-old, y'all do. That
We
is
do.
true.
Yeah.
We do way too much.
We do a
true.
podcast about it. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's
I
called
think so.
About Sex.
Podcasts are great
Yeah,
for
aren't
that.
they?
I think
Yeah.
they need to have that in the nursing home. But
Yeah.
he, at one point, somebody walked in. A nurse did.
Yeah.
And she walked in. She picked up whatever she needed, and she walked out.
She stole it.
No.
No.
What?
She did what she needed to do,
And she left.
and then
Oh,
she
okay.
left. And so, for George,
She wasn't there for the porn.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
She wasn't there for the porn. His porn wasn't taken away.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't penalized,
Mm-hmm.
and there was also this sort of rejuvenation, like, ooh, I got caught.
Oh no!
Oh, no.
I'm so bad.
Right. But it made him feel almost like young again, because he, at that time,
He kind of felt
Took in
like he was
more
in an oppressive
freedom.
environment, but really he
Yes.
just took his freedom. Yeah.
right, he took in more freedom, he took in more autonomy,
Yeah.
and he took in more personal choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is what I'm going to do.
Which that's a need for all adults, to have some version of autonomy. I think when people feel like they're losing that, they start to have trouble. That's when they come into my office for therapy, is when they
Right.
kind of feel like they've lost themselves and their partner.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So you mentioned something about ageism and how we infantilize.
Infantilize?
Is that the word?
Yes.
Yeah.
Infantilize.
Old people. Tell me about this concept.
So I'm a firm believer that internalized ageism starts from
What does that
a very
mean?
young age.
What does internalized ageism mean?
So I'm old, therefore I'm asexual, therefore I don't deserve to have sex, and if I do have an interest in sex, then I'm a dirty old woman.
I see.
Or a dirty old man.
So it's self-hate.
Yeah, you take on the perception of society and claim it as your own, whether it's subconscious or conscious or what have you. But think about the conversations you've had as a kid when you may not have had this experience, but for many people, when they hear their mom or dad or kissing, ew, gross. One is because they're parents, and somehow that being the parents already puts them in a place where they're not supposed to have sex, they're not supposed to be intimate. And so
that's funny, but my kid will never be allowed to do that. I'll be like, no, if you do that, I'm going to make out with her more in front of you. Sorry. Go to bed, Olivia.
Go to your room.
Yeah. If you don't like it, there are other
private
rooms. Yeah.
I
Why is she
respect your
there?
space. I respect mine.
Yeah.
Right. So then it just goes on,
As you can tell, I don't have trouble taking my own.
I'm
Yeah.
all
You
about
take
it.
what's
I
yours,
take it.
babe.
Yeah. I love my wife, and I don't care who knows. Yeah.
Oh, yay.
Well, that's the reality. Is like you got to be able to be free
Exactly.
to yourself. Even.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're struggling with restricting their own needs and desires.
Well, and
Right.
this happens with women even as they start to go into their 30s and 40s, right? Like, so if there's ageism and that, like, you have to be young and beautiful and perfect, then anytime you're not one of those three things, then you feel like you're not supposed to be having sex. And I know women who struggle, like, if they gain weight, they feel like they can't have sex, or if they start to get old, they feel like they can't, and they'll stop their sex based on how they see themselves and through ageism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So what does society say about it? You only had this like small frame of time in your life that you're allowed to have sex and be sexual.
Right.
And then after that, you're not supposed to.
Right.
Yep.
Like as
So it's-
children, you're
cut
not
off.
supposed to touch
18
yourself.
to 45, maybe. And after that,
Maybe
no.
45 is a little, it's kind of
That's
pushing
actually
it.
pushing it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because anytime you think of it, I think any type of, especially for women, like you said, any milestone,
Yeah.
like after you have a kid, or if you choose not to have a kid, there's that sort of milestone that was met and has passed, and well, now
Once
what?
you pass the breeding stage. pretty
Yes,
much.
yeah,
Hmm.
right.
Yeah, and it affects people in their sex life, because I have women who are struggling with that, who won't have sex in the light. They will turn the lights off, or they will wear a shirt because they can't find their bodies beautiful. And I think women are beautiful. We have wonderful curves, and it's kind of sad that a lot of women just feel that way. Men do a little bit too, but I just see it a little different among you guys. Either you have a very good facade
It's
that you
facade,
put up,
100%.
or you just don't care. I don't know.
It's the facade.
It's the facade.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there's insecurity for guys.
Guys just
too.
show it through
They just
anger.
don't
It's different.
That's true.
Women
It's true.
internalize, beat themselves up. Men do that too, but then they're just direct
They just
anger
aggress.
everywhere.
You have aggression outward.
Like
Welcome to
work.
testosterone. That's how we do.
Yeah.
The more you know.
Dun, dun. Oh no, no more PSAs.
I know, and I can't even sing with my horrible voice this time. Sorry, guys, my PSAs will be a little crappy.
Ooh, you sing your public service
I
announcements?
do.
Oh, I
They're so
wanna hear
fun.
it.
You know, remember from when we were kids?
The
Yes.
more you know. That's the song.
I learned it by watching you,
There's
Dad.
4 notes. I'm not your dad.
No, it was the PSA from when we were kids about
I know.
drugs.
No, yeah, I know. I am familiar.
So
Anyway,
tell us more about infantilizing old people.
yeah.
So when you get to the time, so you've gone through your milestones,
Mhm.
right? You already know what they say about older folk having sex,
Mhm.
that they don't have sex, or that they're
Mhm.
dirty. And so then, dirty old men or dirty. Actually, you don't really hear about dirty old women. You do hear cougars, and cougars are, they're still patronized. I mean, there's the label called cougar,
Yeah.
But I
And-
do think it's got a
But I
little more of
think
a
they-
positive
Yeah, I
connotation.
think they have a little bit
actually.
more
but way better. Way
Yeah,
better.
Yeah.
cougars and pumas.
cougars and pumas.
Ooh,
But a
yeah.
cougar is seen more of like as a woman who's not attached, who's out there hunting. Who's in her
Right.
her
But she's
50s
an
or
older woman who
60s.
has
Yeah.
money, and so she can
Yeah.
attract the younger men.
So like a married woman at that age, they still see him as asexual to the grandkids, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's
at
the
some
trouble.
point, no matter what,
Yeah.
you're asexual.
No, you're not though. But
No,
you're not.
Of course you're not.
Because they still have sex just as much as the rest of the population, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
And they have more time on their hands too. If they're retired, they're going to probably be doing
People
it more.
come see me right after the kids
Yeah.
leave and beyond. I have
Like-
60, 70, 80-year-olds come see me because
Yeah.
they want to have good sex.
Yeah. My oldest research participant was 94
Wow.
and very much interested
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
in redefining what sex looks like for them.
Yeah.
How do they have to redefine it?
Yeah. What is redefinition?
You know, your body ages. So you do have that, which also, I think, perpetuates internalized ageism.
like
Because
restrictions.
when your body starts
Mhm.
aging,
Mhm.
then you start, it's kind of like when you gain weight. You're like,
Mhm.
now I'm not, I don't lubricate, or I don't have an erection, or maybe I have issues ejaculating. So there's all of these things that kind of go on that sort of signify or symbolize like the death of your sex life.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're an older adult, you're it's compounded, especially
Mhm.
whenever you're in the nursing home, because it's even more compounded.
Yeah.
You know, you for whatever reason you're in the nursing home, more than likely it's due to mobility
Mm-hmm.
Or senility, issues with dementia.
Right.
I want to
Um,
put this out there. Only 4% of elderly people end up in nursing homes. I
Yes.
researched that when I was doing my talk for the
Yeah.
aging conference. So I was like, actually, it's a pretty small population.
It's so small.
Yeah.
And quite a few people want to live at home till
Yeah.
they die.
Yeah.
Right.
And bang away.
Because the idea of it is so daunting to go
Well, I mean,
into a nursing
They
home, I
they
think.
even call it nursing home. When you think
Yeah.
nursing,
Yes.
you think of mother nursing her baby. You know,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's even the environment itself is infantilizing
Yes.
Yeah.
because they are the mothers and fathers taking care of their
You have to be taken
older
care
children,
of.
pretty
Right.
much. Yeah,
Right.
Mhm.
which some people end up having to be taken care of, but you still don't. You still want to feel like an adult.
You still want to,
Yeah,
I mean, the question I always ask is, when's the last time you were hugged?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, they don't
most
get hugs?
don't know, zero.
That's
I
sad.
don't know, maybe like a month ago.
Ah,
Could you imagine not being touched?
yeah, that would suck.
That would suck.
That would be bad.
I mean, just in the
Yeah.
the most, the tender way of just,
Yeah.
hand on the shoulder kind of thing.
Everybody
wants to touch my
Everybody
touchy
wants to
I've
hole.
been
touch your
there.
shoulder. Last week, same thing.
Because I'm pretty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to get a hole
There
in
you
my
go. There you
shoulder
go.
right there. I'm going to cut a hole in all my shirts right
Touch
there.
both of your shoulders.
Thank
This
you.
is touch equality here.
It's like, oh, yeah, I feel, oh, God.
Are you on LSD, honey?
No, I can rub my face up and down and not be on LSD. How dare you?
So Ashley Montagu wrote a book in the 60s about the power of touch
Mm-hmm.
and how as beings we thrive or we don't
Mm-hmm.
based on our ability to receive human connection at a very young age. And it goes across the lifespan until
Right.
you're an older person
Right.
where you need to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
And that just doesn't happen regardless of the 4% nursing home folk. When you're out there in the community, in your own home, as you age, your family members, they die off. Your friends die off. So the opportunity to connect really becomes your responsibility
Mm-hmm.
because people aren't necessarily coming to you as whenever you were younger.
Yeah.
So then you have to do so much more outreach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do they do more outreach? What do you mean by that? Like try to be in social groups?
Maybe
Yeah.
social community
Exactly.
centers. Like my grandma used to go to the Bridgeton Community Center, and they
Yeah.
did cards every day. So
Yeah.
like that was one way she connected.
Your
And I
mom
have
is
clients who do Bridge Club.
your mom is also part of like a social group.
My mom
with
is a part of the deaf, because my mother's deaf, so she's part of a deaf
Yeah.
social group.
But like
Um,
of all of the older people, like I think she's the most socially that we know.
Mhm.
She's the most socially connected because of that, because she's part of that.
That's exactly what you have
yeah,
to do.
you have to get
Big
some
part
sort
of
of
it.
community. And anytime somebody's
gotta plan for
retiring
that.
and they come into my office and they're like, "What am I supposed to do with this?" I'm like, "Get involved into a community."
Oh yeah.
And they still need some sort of purpose too. Like those are kind of like the two most important things for
We all
aging
do.
well. Yeah, for everybody. But like
Yeah.
I think people have been working so long, that's how they've gotten their purpose. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's hard to develop a new sense of purpose once they leave their job. So what'll happen is people will retire for 3 months and live like they're on vacation, and they'll go back to work because they're
Right.
depressed.
Right.
So
Or
I've
their
heard that a lot of
partner-
times where they retire
Yeah.
and they come back I think Brett Favre did it like 7 times.
Brett Favre. Yeah, that's right. He
Quarterback.
retired.
He's like,
I forgot about that football player.
I'm 50 years old, but you guys want to pay me $10 million to play? Okay,
Well,
I'll do it again. Okay, I'll come back in. Yeah, it's hard to pass that.
Yeah, I think retirement is one of those crucial ages where if you have the money, great, you celebrate. If you don't have the money, then a whole new conversation has to go on.
Right.
Because your brain has to be stimulated, and when you don't have access to all those social outlets that you used to, you find yourself in a sort of sort of like a bleak circumstance.
Yeah.
And
you're in like a void where you don't feel as connected and social with people.
I mean, your whole life you worked as a sex therapist, and at 65 you retired. Now who are you?
Now what are you doing? Sitting at home?
I don't know.
And where is your partner?
Yeah.
And is your partner?
That's true, because he'll probably die before me.
Oh yeah.
and then
it'll be around 62 though, so you got a few years.
If not, we'll do a
retire
murder
at 61,
suicide.
You got a solid year.
Got another solid
We got
25,
plenty of years.
30 years.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. I mean, actually, my grandpa lived past my grandma, and we always thought, the female would live longer, but you never know. It depends on how people take care of themselves and genetics.
Right.
Isn't he 90 now?
He's in his 90s. He is old. He's still trucking around.
Oh yeah.
Well, and like I said, even at 90 some any age really, it's just that desire to be connected. Now I've met people, older adults who are like, I don't want to be touched. I don't want to connect with anybody. To me, sex is work, and sex is commitment, and sex is making 5 meals a day.
Sex is making 5 meals a day.
So sorry, because sex was not sex.
Let's
sex
talk
was
about
obligation.
that. Yeah, that was from the older generation. There are some people
where they didn't
who still
have
had this
access
old
to birth
world
control, maybe.
Well,
in that generation,
they were raised in a way.
You're talking about people born in the 1940s,
talking about like the baby boomers.
Yeah, 1930s,
some of the baby
1940s.
boomers were raised in a cultural environment where really to be a wife was to be defined by white males, and it meant that you had to give it away along with your cooking and your cleaning, and then his job was to pay, right?
Yeah.
And that I'm not saying everyone is, because I know plenty of baby boomers who are completely different,
Right.
but there is definitely a group of
right.
them
It's
that
the
like,
nuclear family.
they would
point of
rather
view.
not
Oh,
have
yeah.
sex ever. I knew a lot of Chinese ladies too, and they would avoid getting married as well because there was this like dominant male culture where they'd lose all their power, and so
Right.
they intentionally avoid getting married. Young Chinese women would
Yeah.
avoid getting married so they wouldn't lose their rights.
Right.
It's crazy.
Well, I mean, if you think about
It's almost
it,
like being bought and sold
Yeah.
to some people.
Well, because there is
Well,
a very
Depends on the
male
culture.
culture,
Yeah.
and like you're the wife and you have to do certain
Exactly.
things. And so if
Yeah.
they wanted to go to college, they'd avoid getting married.
yeah.
right.
It's interesting.
Because they need.
We're in a position, I think, especially when you look at the older adults, that if you look at the education that they did receive about sex, it came as a result of soldiers. Sex education in this country came as a result of soldiers coming back with STDs.
Oh yeah.
And we got to fix that problem.
We gotta
have
teach them how to put a
lot of
Jimmy
young
on.
soldiers coming in and impregnating
All those
these women,
sailors.
and-
Oh my.
Yes,
Dirty
It was always
sailors.
the sailors.
right.
Because
And
they're
the
going port to port, spreading it around. Yeah.
Exactly. And the only time they ever, the only things that they really covered in sex education, they used the birds and the bees. So they talked about, pollinating, and they talked about, and that's how you do it.
And you know what? I've never
And-
seen a bird have sex with a bee. It never happens.
Yes.
I know. I don't think it's relevant.
No.
I don't think it's anatomically
Like, do they have
correct.
puppets like a bird and a bee?
No, they
and
watched
go
a
bang, bang.
they watched a video.
Yeah.
They watched a black and white video, and that was the only. And the interesting thing was, if you look at just how we treat men and women and gender roles, by and large, it almost seems like that was sort of the baseline. That's where it kind of became reality. The women, the young females, were taught, what do you need to do? Your home economics class is going to teach you how to, bake a meatloaf and teach you how to be a good caregiver and a good provider. And for men, it was, so you have these desires. If you have desires, then you need to be careful with which person you choose. And you can never be gay.
Don't be gay.
Don't be, you cannot,
what
you
they
cannot have same-sex relationships. That was completely ostracized.
But they still did. Yeah. They just
Yeah.
had to hide it a
They
lot
just
more.
had to
then.
hide it, and it
and
was scary.
yeah,
And it was dangerous sometimes.
and it was very, very dangerous for them because that was the rhetoric that was going on in schools.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was it.
And a lot of it's very much controlled by just that old dogma, that old religious dogma where it's like, this is how it has to be. We wrote it down 2,000 years ago.
Right.
And no interpretation for modern times can happen.
Right.
I've seen some themes of
Some
that.
people
Right.
don't follow that and are still religious, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like, so those first generation gay men, I sometimes will see them and you'll see a little bit more fear in who they come out to and when they date, because there was a time when it was very dangerous, but they paved the way for some of the younger generation
Yeah.
to not
In
have
the
that same
60s,
fear.
70s, and 80s, yeah.
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 But I mean, I'll see it still. Like, they're very careful and
It's
you
actually
don't know who you
starting
can
to
trust.
become.
So
it's
careful.
starting with social media. People are actually starting to just like put it out there.
I know.
Like they just say,
This is the most
it.
narcissistic
So you
generation
know.
I hear.
Well, I think it
We
gives
love
space
ourselves.
for people who are in part of those minority populations to
Mhm.
feel like they can have a voice a
And
little
they can
easier,
find other
and they can
people in
share it with
community.
their family and friends. And
Yeah.
people who are gay aren't as invisible, I think, because of it. Because
Yeah.
you see them; they're all around us. They're our friends, our family, our brothers and sisters. They're everywhere.
Yeah. Well, there was that whole website, It Gets Better. That was all about, like,
Yeah.
for those young teens
Don't
that
kill
were coming
yourself.
out.
Yeah,
Like, hey, as you age and you have more autonomy, your life will be
Oh.
better.
right.
Yes.
Really, when you get out of high school, life
Yeah,
will be better.
I do
Yeah.
agree, because in high school there can still be a roughness around
No matter
the way
what, high
people
school sucks.
behave. Some high schools have gotten better, though. When they have comprehensive education, they seem to be a lot cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do, because then
Or at
they learn
least
to be awesome
A
people.
little bit more conversation around the topic instead of no and never and
Yeah.
And you're a bad
and
person.
you're a bad person.
And the absolutes.
Right.
Yeah. So sex. Oh, what are you gonna ask? Go for it.
Go ahead.
I was
You
gonna
had
ask
Which
about
one?
sex education.
Yeah.
Like,
we're not
what
talking
kinds
about-
of things for comprehensive education would you say are important for people to be talking about as they're aging?
So, do you research sex education, or what do you do with sex education?
Yeah.
So I have been, I've started researching sex education.
Mm-hmm.
I teach a sexuality and counseling course.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. And some of this, I say it's great because I love
great.
talking about sex, and I get 16 weeks to talk about sex all
Yeah.
day to people who've never talked about sex before.
Ever.
You're right, and for most of them, and then I get to blow their mind, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh, I can counsel anybody now related to sexuality."
Mhm.
At least that's the majority of them. Some are like, "No, Angie, you're ridiculous."
I think
but-
every therapist should be able to talk about sex. It comes up
Exactly.
literally. People will come to me for anxiety, and then sex comes up.
Exactly.
Every
So-
single one. They're like, "Oh, I'm here in here because my elbow hurts." Also, I have penis problems.
Right?
And
People will
if
do
we
that
don't have a
when
lot
they go
of
to the
time,
doctor,
Can we
like
work
if-
on my penis problem
Yeah.
first?
Like apparently, if people will do that at the doctor, they'll like come in and say,
Mhm.
"I have a cold," but then when they actually get in the room with the doctor, then they start addressing the real issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of them will struggle
It's
to
such
even
a
say
shame.
sex or vagina or
Uh-huh.
penis. They'll be like intimate, or we want to get close. And I'm
Right.
like,
Or
you can say
hoo-ha.
sex
Right.
in here. You know, I'm a sex
Hoo-ha,
therapist, right?
Yeah, I think
Right.
that's a real problem with our culture is we try to hide the words for
Yeah.
clinical terms and
Yes.
just label them as bad words.
That's
Like
my first
I remember
class.
I had somebody
Mhm.
who
Just telling them all
Who
the
was-
words and getting them to
Yeah,
shout
who
like,
out.
literally
shout
got
out
mad
winner.
at me because I used the word masturbate when their
Oh, that's
teenage
right.
children were around. They're,
Mhm.
I'm like, really? It's masturbation.
Like I
Get
said,
over
I
it.
think those should be household words.
They
should be
are.
household words.
It happens.
Masturbation.
Masturbate.
It's okay. Do it in your
Right.
room.
Shout it from the
Make it
rooftop.
like a rumbling, yes, and then get real loud. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So if I can look at, so I teach it from a clinical perspective.
Mhm.
When we were dealing with clients, that, like you said, come in for an elbow and it's really an issue
Mhm.
with erectile difficulties or intimacy or just. I've never had, most common I hear from women, I've never had an orgasm.
That's so common.
Right? So
How do they never have an orgasm? Like, what do they do
well,
with all their time?
I have lots of thoughts about why women believe that they don't know what an orgasm is.
Yeah. Well, go on.
Well, okay.
We
Well,
got time.
So I think I think we're taught as children. Well, we're not taught as
Mhm.
children that we have genitalia. We pee
Yeah.
and we poop.
What?
We talk a
That's it.
lot about peeing
No
and
way.
pooping. My kids
Well,
are
there's a
4
lot
and
of it
6,
in the
and they
early
are
years.
fascinated with pee and poop.
Yeah.
Primarily poop. And but there's never that conversation. At least I would say the majority of, if I can make a guess, the majority of folk do not talk to their children.
Which makes it already a scary
About
topic. If it's
Right.
never talked
It's
about,
never
there
talked
must be a
about.
reason.
Right.
Or if they do talk about it, they talk about it in negative ways of saying you cannot do it. You're
Yeah.
not allowed
Negative.
to
Don't
do it.
touch yourself.
Yeah, don't touch yourself. Don't have sex with
You'll
people.
grow hair on your
Exactly.
palm.
Yeah.
You know, which
Oh my
isn't true.
gosh.
You're not going to grow hair.
No, but
I've done it
heard that.
multiple times.
This would be like 3 feet long. Come on. I would
Why
be so
wouldn't you
hairy.
shave it?
No, he
No.
don't.
Yeah, I'm owning this.
It makes it softer.
Like a new person.
All right, gang, I got to use the restroom. I'll be right back.
Oh.
Keep it going.
And here we have our mid-show bathroom sprint
That's
for
funny.
Angela. Continue.
Sex
Sex ed.
education.
Teach me. What is this sex you speak of?
Okay. Well, I don't know about the hair growing, but I actually did hear that when I asked my participants, when did you first learn about sex? Well, I did learn about if you were to masturbate, that you would grow hair on your hands. And
They thought that was actually real.
a real thing for a very
God.
long time.
Wow.
And it wasn't, and for the women, never. In fact, when I said to one particular participant, it was just a really alarming and I think sad thing.
Mhm.
They believed that if they masturbated, then that meant that they were interested in the same sex. And so that engaging in masturbation was only for people who
were homosexual.
were gay or
Or
lesbian
bisexual.
or
Yeah.
bisexual.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I
So
don't-
they
I don't-
never, ever. And when I tried.
Because they worried
I was
they
like,
might fall in
Did
love
you
with
know
themselves.
that everybody can masturbate?
Everybody
Oh,
does.
No, never. We're not going to, I don't want to talk about that. That's not, I'm not.
Yeah, they just
No.
don't register it
No,
as something
no,
that
not
can
even,
happen.
not even close.
Yeah.
So, the comprehensive sex education,
Mhm.
I grew up in Cahokia, Illinois.
Mhm. They got
and
mounds there. Yeah.
We do have mounds. It's about 15
Cahokia Mounds.
minutes away, I think.
I've been there.
It's a great field trip.
Mhm.
But my experience with sex ed was a lot different than I think many people. We had a daycare in our high school or at
Mhm.
our high school
I see.
because to retain students, especially female students who were pregnant, was really hard. So they
Yeah.
created a daycare
That's
in
good.
hopes that we can retain our
That's
students
good.
and they can graduate
When I was
and
in
be
high
better.
school, they didn't have a daycare. They would just send the girls who got pregnant off to a special school.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
They would isolate them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had sex ed. We talked a lot about, mainly it was like A and P. Like, this is your vagina,
Mhm.
which is not. It's a vulva, but okay. And
Even I call it a vagina. It's like
everybody calls it a vagina.
everybody calls it a vagina or a penis, and I know that's actually the canal on the
Yes.
inside. But
Well,
you
there's
just
a
call the
reason.
overall thing a vagina.
Right.
So there's a reason
Right.
why it's important to call it a
Or-
vulva. And I've been recently reading this book called Becoming Clitorate. And it talks about how when we don't name it for what it is, we're actually keeping out the parts that are part of female pleasure,
Yeah.
right? So the female pleasure comes from the vulva and the clitoris and the labia,
Mhm.
not the vagina. That's actually the least sensitive and sexual part of us. I mean, it does get us pregnant. So,
Sure.
have sex in our vagina and we'll get
it
pregnant.
has a purpose.
But like to name those parts is to make it known that like these are the areas to focus on if you really
Sure.
want us to have pleasure.
Sure, but in,
And that's what she's kind of her
in
case is in
common
the book.
language, though, people just use vagina, though. Because
Well,
it's easier.
I'm calling ours a vulva. And when I watch my daughter, I tell her it's her vulva.
Okay.
Right.
But it's fine. You can
A
still
rose
call
bite.
it vagina. I won't like get mad
Call
at
it a
you.
rose. Call it a rose. It's a rose. It doesn't matter.
It's a pretty
Yeah.
thorny rose
Yeah.
too, so I understand.
If it was up to my 4-year-old, she'd call it her butt. She just still doesn't
Oh yeah,
get
her
it.
front butt.
Like her
Yeah.
front butt.
Front butt.
I think that's what her family calls it, the bottom.
I did have a friend who that's what they would call it. They just call it the bottom. They would
Mhm.
not reference it at all.
Oh,
Mhm.
it's just the bottom area.
Yeah.
That's it.
Nope, just bottom.
This whole area is a
Yeah.
bottom. That's it.
Yep.
So we were talking about sex education.
Mhm.
In Missouri, it says abstinence only preferred,
Mhm.
not abstinence only required.
Right.
And what we've come to find out, especially in Missouri, where we've had quite a few parents come to the front
Mhm.
and argue the point that we need comprehensive sex education
That's good.
in hopes that we do not, in hopes that they make good choices,
Mhm.
essentially.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to touch yourself.
Yeah.
You're probably going to touch somebody else. It's more than likely going to be consensual, but do you know what consent means?
Right. You gotta
And do
teach
you
'em.
know the ramifications of touching each other?
Mm-hmm.
So that
kids
kind of
don't know
conversation
anything. Yeah.
doesn't happen
Right.
in sex ed, by and large, in the state of Missouri.
Mhm.
In fact, if you look at so Erin Marin, she was assaulted as a child, and nobody believed her. Nobody looked for any signs, even though the signs were there. And so she really sort of paved the way and took this really, I think, heroic stance and made it known, all the things that ever happened to her and how it could have been prevented. And so Erin's Law, if you look it up, she has been able to go all nationally to put this into a law. Yeah. And so the state of Missouri, you are supposed to follow Erin's Law, which means you are supposed to educate about consent and the signs and symptoms of sexual assault and sexual trauma, or not trauma, but, anything that could be seen, as cruel or damaging or whatever, so, instead of putting a blind eye to it. Yeah. And so my quest that I always ask my students is go to your district and find out, how is Erin's Law implemented in your school? The majority of the students say they don't have anything.
They don't have anything.
They don't have anything.
They don't know what consent is.
Right. It's a freaking law.
Yeah. It's a law, but it's not followed.
It's a law, but not followed. Yeah. And because we have this whole abstinence only mindset,
and people teaching it,
and
right here around the corner. Actually,
I want to tell you what's happening, as a result of this. Okay,
one of our guests a few weeks back, maybe a couple months back, Sally Buxbaum. She actually is a real advocate for comprehensive education, and she's been pushing definitely for the St. Charles district and all the other districts around here to actually teach real sex education and not just say, no, don't do it. And she recently got banned from one of the districts, I believe it's St. Charles district.
It might have been because she was saying shame. Shame.
So I wonder, I do want to ask her if that's why, but one of the last few things we saw is somebody said she was standing there at the end of the thing doing like they did on Game of Thrones.
It was a parody.
Parodying Game of Thrones.
But to explain what this that's what I was wanting to go into is so that these abstinence and consequence only sex educations are using either fear-based teaching
or isolation
or shame-based teaching.
Which
and
is isolated.
I want to tell you what's going on in the brain if people actually internalize that. So basically what happens is instead of making art, so the discerning part of the brain is the frontal lobe. This is the part that when you give it facts, it starts thinking and considers what it's going to do, you know, right? But when you use fear and shame-based teaching, we activate the midbrain, which is that fight or flight response. If it is successful, what happens then is people, when they're making choices about sex, are all the way here. They're reactive. They're not thinking cognitively about what's the best choice here. They're reactive. They're reacting to their hormones. They're not thinking about consent. And what's funny is the biggest thing I talk about is communication, that those are the two responses I get from every client. They're either avoiding sex, that's the fear, the fight or the flight, or they're fighting about it, which is the fight. And so all of them are in that reactive space. And the first thing I have to do with literally every couple is bring them out of that space and make sex casual and comfortable. Yeah. And so I just want you guys to see the long-term thing that's happening to people.
It even affects people well into their adulthood and well into maybe even their 60s and 70s.
When you're supposed to be having all kinds of sex, and even if they're married, I'm not against people's values. If you want to teach your kids hey, sex is important, wait till marriage, you're allowed to have your values. But if you want kids to make smart decisions, you have to give them actual facts, and then you have to trust them to make the best decision for themselves. Yeah. And that's the problem, is I think people just want to control them, and they're so scared of their kids potentially having sex that they use those strategies that are terrible. They're terrible.
They are. And I see some progress with that. I see even people among very conservative populations who are starting to kind of say, well, maybe it still is important to teach about condoms
in my
and
office
consent.
Struggling with sex.
Somebody we know, I'm not going to say who, but she has kids and she is conservative, but she even went out of her way to teach her kids about condoms and consent so that they could be safe. And then she still taught them her values about what it means to be Christian and all that good stuff. And then her point of view. But she still gave them that safety. And a lot of people use the metaphor of riding a bike. You give the kid a helmet. That doesn't mean you want him to go over and smash his head on the ground.
Doesn't mean you advocate for crashes.
Right. It means you don't want him to get AIDS.
It's like a condom, right?
Exactly.
You don't want him to get AIDS. You don't want him to get
advocate.
STD or get pregnant when they're not ready for it at a young age.
You're just protecting them.
Yeah.
I think that, yes. Yes.
You agree.
I
Yes
concur.
to all of it.
So something you mentioned earlier.
It just makes me so sad when I think about it.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I'm
do that
listening,
too.
I'm
I'm like, oh. I have those moments too.
I'm like, damn.
They're my therapy shutdown moments.
Yeah,
Why is this
but sometimes
happening?
you can't save the world. You just got to save who's in front of you. And you guys are therapists. You got
So
plenty
we
of
get a
people.
chance to
We
save
do.
people
Trying to
all the
help.
time.
Yeah.
It's
and
exciting.
educate and yeah.
So you were talking earlier about people not being taught the signs of sexual trauma.
Mhm.
Oh, I want to know that.
What are the signs? Like, teach our
Teach us
viewers
Aaron's
right now.
law.
Teach us. I think that's an important one to know. Is like, what
No,
are some
people
things
wanna
that
know
people
that.
need to
Sure.
look for to work if they worry their kids may be being abused? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think many of the signs of any kind of trauma are differences in the child's behavior.
They have
So,
big change.
Right. So if they're, happy, bubbly, and then all of a sudden their affect is just very low, aggravated beyond the typical aggravation, because my kids can display quite the level of aggravation on
Sure.
a day-to-day basis.
It's more just their mood entirely.
Oh,
turns
everything.
to
Like
that.
you're just recognizing that there's a shift that it
What
happened.
Yeah.
A real what happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes bedwetting occurs, nightmares occur, night terrors, day terrors, night terrors. Yeah.
Sure.
All of that starts to sort of come out. You might actually notice physiological changes if they have sleep disturbances or if they have, they may even have marks if they're talking. So the biggest thing I think from Aaron's Law was she was ignored.
She was telling people that she was being abused.
So if you are in a position where even my daughter, it was like, oh, I kissed somebody, we kiss each other's peepees. I was like,
Oh, no. Now you have to have
All
that
right.
conversation. Yeah.
So, from my hat, right. So I took that hat off and tried to, balance the hats. I'm like, okay, it's really, really, really late, but she really wants to stay up. That we were talking about other things in general, but not peepees. And yet here's this conversation. It went from kissing and then the intrigue was there. So then it shifted. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in the end, nobody kissed anybody's peepee.
Yeah.
But I heard it through.
Right.
I processed it.
Yeah.
I talked to,
Don't assume that it's not the case. Talk,
Right.
learn.
talk and learn and find out the truth.
Yeah.
And if you are uncomfortable as a parent, take them to a counselor.
Yeah.
It's not going to harm. Counseling doesn't harm. At least
Yeah.
you would like to think that it
Like the
doesn't
thing, it can't.
harm.
Sometimes you can feel re-traumatized by having to share that. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But I mean,
In the long
if
run,
it
I'm sure
hasn't
it'll
come
help.
out.
yeah.
So I knew somebody who was traumatized from a very young age, recognized all the signs, totally demonstrated everything I had said, just really irritable, really isolated themselves, never did anything. In fact, I don't want anybody to make assumptions by what I'm saying and saying, oh my gosh, that's totally my cousin.
Right.
Or that's
Because
totally.
there are people who are introverts.
Right.
Right.
So I'm saying for this specific case, that even the people that they were interested in were, for lack of better words, broken people, people with just really hard lives. And so I finally got that person into counseling because it couldn't be me. And they told.
Yeah.
And that was 4 years of being traumatized and assaulted by one person.
Yeah.
And all it took was one counseling session, one objective listener, and that was it.
Yeah.
So I highly endorse counseling. If you are as a parent, do not feel comfortable having that conversation. What I will say is that if you come in as a parent, I had one parent in my past say, and this was a very long time ago, my kid claims that they were assaulted by my boyfriend. I need you to find out the truth because I'm sure they're lying.
Yeah.
So the
A lot of
parent
times
already
people
made the
assume kids are
decision,
lying. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they already made the decision in their mind, and they came to counseling for that.
Yeah.
And so I had to
They're like,
tell
here,
them
make my life
no.
easier. Make sure they're not. Yeah.
Right. Tell them
Yeah.
they're wrong. Tell
them
them
they're
that they're
wrong.
lying.
And then that pressures the kid to keep it to themselves.
Right. And
Yeah.
I will tell you,
Because
if
they
you're
don't
a-
feel
People
like
don't
they-
report sometimes.
Oh my gosh.
But they feel like they can't speak up.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if you're a parent, and you assume that the counselor is going to follow your lead in saying, like, this person's a liar, you need to find out the truth. They're probably not going to be 100% on board with that. They're probably going to explore what happened, like the details.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Well, don't tell them that, because we want them to bring the kid in anyway. So
I think part of the reason, though, is that parents are scared of what happens next.
the ramifications
So
of
the
it.
ramifications.
So
we
there's
are
legal-
mandatory reporters.
We are.
And in my best cases with this, I have the parents sit with me as I make the call, and they get to be a part of it. Really, so there was this old timey way that the social workers handled it, which was baby snatching, and that's why they got that phrase, that name from, is that they would take the kids out of the home right away. But these days, what I've found is that they send a social worker there. They try to do an assessment. If you're willing to work with them, they want to work with you and get services. Social work has changed because we are more aware now that kids need to be with their parents. They feel safer and more in control. And unless it's really a dangerous situation where we really do need to remove them, they're likely going to stay in your home but get resources and encourage you to report or prosecute if the person
Absolutely.
needs to be protected.
Yeah.
So I just wanted for any parents to know that, because I know it's scary to get
It
reported.
is scary. And, as we were talking about earlier about the whole, the way our society views sex, our society also views asking for help in diverse ways. So, I'm a total seeker, and no, this is private. This needs to be our
just
family.
Get over it. Put your nose to the grindstone.
That happened to me
That's what
too.
everybody says.
Don't let it happen to you. And you really have to think about what's best for the child.
You'll be fine. Just put Windex on it.
Oh, yeah. You'll be good.
Just kidding. That's terrible.
That is terrible.
But no, it's an example of
But I like that
bad
movie.
Angela.
I like that
no,
movie.
I know, right. No, but there not even in sex abuse. I was trying to take a step back from that, and just in general in therapy, people don't come, or they'll come when things are on their last leg, because even just in general asking for help makes you, it's kind of like a weak thing as opposed to something, a sign of strength.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you admit you need help, then you have to do all the work of fixing it.
I know, it's much easier to
It's much
deny
easier
it.
to do nothing instead of doing something.
Yeah.
When it comes to energy
Just make a
levels,
huge
Comes to
elephant
shove,
in the
you're like,
room.
if you say, "Oh, my marriage has problems," well, now you got to go into therapy and talk and argue and
Right.
deal
You gotta
with
become a
things
better
and
person.
learn.
Right.
Ugh.
Or if you're dealing with sex abuse, you have to deal with
Right.
therapy
Yeah,
and
which
court
is hard.
issues and
Right.
all these custody problems.
But I think with
it has to be hard.
Right. I think with anything that you want to change,
Mhm.
that if you put it in your mind that it's going to be harder before it gets easier, because it just takes a lot of courage
Yeah,
and a lot of grit
and you have
to get through the impasse.
to look at the overall goal.
Right.
It's it's not just
Exactly.
going to marriage therapy to do it. It's because you want to be happy in your marriage. You're both going there
Right.
to get better. And for somebody who's dealing with sexual abuse, you're trying to protect that child so you can make them have a good life and have them grow up and be a successful adult.
Right.
Yeah.
So therapy, it takes grit. That's my next PSA.
The more you know.
It takes grit.
Thank you for singing it, honey. You're so kind.
Yeah, her voice is out, so I will be your vocalization for tonight. Although I still have a raspy voice as well.
Yeah, but yours sounds great, so don't worry, babe.
Oh, yeah. How you doing, ladies? So let's move on to eating disorders. You said you work with a lot of people with eating disorders.
Yeah.
And what do most of them come in there dealing with? What are some of the issues that lead to that kind of body image issues?
So an eating disorder, I think, is a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
The food is a symptom.
Yeah.
It is a way that we control. One of the things that we can do to control our world when our world feels uncontrollable.
Yeah.
So we were talking again, as it sort of keeps rounding back to sort of these social mores that we have about body and body image and expectations and gender role. And I think for a lot of individuals, they know how to handle their body, so they restrict, do what they need to. Sometimes what happens even worse, I guess, in worse situations is they have been sexually traumatized.
Yeah.
So, and there are many cases where somebody might gain weight to create an armor. And some may lose as much weight as possible to look more androgynous, to look less female, less curvy.
Yeah.
Because to be a woman is to risk being violated.
Attracting some sort of trauma or assault.
Right, because it's your fault or it's your body's fault.
Right.
Because of our womanly wiles. That's what I've been told.
Right, our curves, they're just so appealing.
Yeah.
That
You shouldn't have been
can't
wearing
control
that.
yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm surprised
Stuff
you're
like
so
that.
far away from her right now because she's
Oh yeah, I
all
can't
there.
keep. Well, no, really, I can't keep my hands off her.
That is true.
No, really, it's my wife though.
But it's
She's okay with it.
consenting,
It's
right?
consenting.
Yeah, like
No, if she's right here, like I
An
always,
adult.
I always
it's
grab
fine.
her leg
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah. But with somebody who's dealing with that, it can cause some eating disorder issues.
Oh,
That's the
yeah.
way they try to control their
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
They feel out of control.
Absolutely. So I came on board. I started at Castlewood Treatment Center looking for a sex therapist to train under. And by the practice, I also learned a great deal about eating disorders. And one of the things that I always found fascinating was regardless of the food, regardless of any of it, in the end, like the body image is the last to go.
Yeah.
It is like the last part of that whole self-torturous process that you put yourself through to go. Because once you gain the weight, then you have to see yourself.
Yeah.
Once you gain the weight, then your brain starts remembering all the reasons why you started to engage in these disordered eating behaviors in the first place. And it's so hard.
Yeah.
So it's easy to blame the body when you have nothing else to blame.
Right. Like,
I mean, you can blame other things. There might be other things, but in the end, it's that. And body image is the last to go because then you're a typical American or whoever, a person in this country, especially where your body is very objectified. And regardless of how long it's been, you know, you're seen as property in the 30s. You're still technically, to a certain degree, seen as property and that your body is not your own. And we've seen a lot of cases come out where if you want a leg up in even, you know, Hollywood, that you gotta bend to the service. So
Put a leg up.
yeah.
Right.
Even
Put a leg
there
up,
was
put your leg
allegations
up.
for Louis C.K. Even like he's the last person I would think.
Right.
Like, what is it with comedians?
I
Come on, guys,
know.
stop it.
Yeah. And so there, you know, then you have that.
Yeah.
And what does we all go through transition, especially when our ideal isn't met up with our perceived, or when our perceived looks worse than what we are.
Yeah.
So it's just such a terrible struggle for many, many, many people.
Yeah.
And so in terms of intimacy and sexuality, learning how to love your body is a really important attribute in having a really good sex life and just being really, you know, presently intimate.
Yeah, because she's not going to find you attractive if you don't find yourself attractive.
Right.
You're not going to present yourself in that
Well,
manner.
what I found is the
Or
women
vice
aren't even,
versa.
they can't even get out of their head. So, like, there's
Exactly.
a long ritual around sex and, like,
Yeah.
shower and, like, getting their head out of that, like, there's a dark space their head is in towards their body.
Yeah.
And then some of them can't even be naked in front of their partners. Some cannot have sex in the light because they just, like, and they'll be so
So
skinny,
they're
too.
So they're overanalyzing their own
Yeah,
appearance.
they
their
they
own
don't even pay attention
body.
to the sexual experience. They're so worried about this that they some of them that I've worked with a few, and some of them can't even hit orgasms, not because of the mechanics, but just because like the mind is just not invested. And if you can't, like, for all of sex, if your mind isn't in the game, it's not going to be good sex.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've seen a lot of challenges with that. And I would agree. Yeah. Like that body image, even if they do get to a point where they're at least at a like healthy weight, they still struggle with
They
that
still
sense of
struggle
I'm
with
ugly or I'm not
acceptance.
good
Yeah.
enough or
They
it's just a
overanalyze.
dark place
They'll
up
always
there.
find
It
something
is.
to criticize their own body about.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, we all do, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
it
I
just
think
it
everybody
takes
does
it
to
to
some
another
degree.
level.
Oh
Right.
yeah,
It just
like
takes
my
it to another
elbows.
level.
Ugh. Tell me.
Your elbows are beautiful.
We want you to love yourself, Josh.
I do. Oh, he's awesome. Don't worry. I'm okay. So what are some of the treatment models for something like an eating disorder? Do you use EMDR or what is it? So she's talking about being mindful. That's their issue during sex. Like, so what are the treatment?
I think in the end, it's just like mindfulness and being present is like the ultimate goal.
That's it.
Yeah, just to be comfortable with the mindfulness.
Yeah.
To be comfortable with your body. But eating disorders, the main treatments are cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, mindfulness, different levels of mindfulness treatment. Art therapy, expressive therapies, they're all really helpful.
Ooh, I like art.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. So,
I've never heard of art therapy.
It's expressive therapy, psychodrama. All of it is, I think, really, really helpful because it's, especially when you're using art.
Yeah.
In art forms, you can externalize the process. So you don't necessarily have to think inward, and you don't have to talk inward about it.
Yeah.
You can sort of say, this is what my eating disorder looks like.
And you can create something which makes you feel accomplished.
Yes.
And you feel safe to do it probably a little bit because that's not me. That's a piece of art. It's fiction. We can call it fiction. It's something else beside me.
Yeah.
And I can accept it for what it is.
And it can be cathartic because then, you're getting that sort of, that demon out. You're getting that evil, that dark part out.
Yeah.
And you put it onto something.
Yeah. And you make it beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. And so just witnessing it in its misery.
Yeah.
Witnessing the misery it created for you.
Yeah.
Can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different, really great creative ways to work through trauma. It's funny, he listens to this Eminem station, and I think of Eminem as like a rapper who has some trauma and who's using rap to really express himself.
He totally does.
Like every morning when he's listening, I'm like, Eminem, you get it out, man.
He does. Yeah.
It's a hard life.
Is it a podcast?
No,
Eminem,
he just
the
has
musician.
music. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
you don't know Eminem?
No, I know Eminem. I know Eminem. Saying like he was talking about something.
No, just listen to his lyrics.
I love
he's got
him.
some sad stuff.
A lot of people criticize him for being so violent and all that, but the reality is that's something he struggled with his whole life is being growing up in a very violent and an environment where you can be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
It creates that anger in an adult, just like sexual trauma or other traumas do.
Right.
So he works through it, I think, through his music. And not always in a good way. Sometimes he puts it really out there.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, like, 15 years into his career, like, now I love the song where he's saying, I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I cleaned out my closet.
Maybe I was taking this a little too far.
Yeah, I know you were going through a rough time, too. I think he gained perspective over the years. Yeah. And he says, like, he never even plays that song anymore at his concerts because of that, because he regrets it, So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's just an example. So rap or writing books or art or expressive therapies can be like dance therapies or just like there's yoga type
write a
things
novel,
people
right?
do.
Short stories or
or sacred movement. We had this woman who does like it's like sexual expressive dancing, and it's really beautiful, and they do it in the dark so you don't have to feel like body conscious. Yeah, it's very sweet. I did one of the classes and I felt very beautiful at the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Gina Ogden, I think, does a lot of tantric work, and she does
Tantra.
Ooh, we want to get one of those.
Oh, I actually do want somebody who I want to have a guest on who can talk about Tantra and all that.
That would be awesome. I know nothing. I just
You'll have to give us her name.
She's an ASEC. She's long distance.
Yeah,
that's fine. Anyway.
She has retreats. You could
fun
retreats.
Oh, that's true.
I think we need to sign up.
We should go to one. I think it'd be fun.
I think that would be a very interesting thing to study.
We have to naked dance at a retreat.
I don't know, but she did this thing where everybody was moving, and then they had to move and touch each other, but in a sort of consensual, like, do you give permission? Yes. Okay, now touch. Okay. And it was amazing.
It's just for sexual expression. People are so like, oh no, just tighten. So it's nice to. It's okay. I'm a sexual person. This is allowed.
I'm a human being. I need contact. Yes.
Okay. I think we've done.
So I wanted to touch on one thing. One last topic.
One last thing.
We talked a little bit about kind of the opposite. It may be kind of to that kind of suppressing your sexuality. Somebody who has something like chronic infidelity. Who is very hypersexual. So we were talking a little bit about that, and how do you think that kind of personality trait comes about?
Are you asking me or
you?
You
both are sex therapists. Like, it's an interesting thing to me.
I'll tell you something, but you can tell me otherwise, right?
Okay.
So what I found, now not every person who has this trait has like a trauma past. Right. But I will say when trauma occurs, people have very extreme outcomes as a result. They either box up their sex life and avoid it, or they become very sexual as a means, but in a way that they want to control it in some way. So like, it's kind of like a way of retaking back sex, and sometimes they do it in healthy ways and sometimes not so healthy ways, because our culture doesn't teach people about consent or how to be like a healthy sexual person. So
Right.
I do see that extreme.
We don't have sex education.
Boundaries, no,
Boundaries, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have seen both extremes as a result of trauma, but I've also seen just like there are people who have very hyper sexual desires, and there's no right or wrong to where you fall on the desire spectrum. People are all over, but like
Right.
for people who tell me they could have sex 3 or 4 times a day, but their partner is like, I think once a week's good. And
4
if
times
they
a
have
day.
boundary crossing issues.
So newlyweds, yeah. But after you've been married 10 years,
maybe
good,
once we
good
did
luck
it like
getting
that.
one
Once.
a day.
That was a good day.
Oh, it
It was a
was.
good day.
We never left the
Oh my
hotel
gosh.
room that day. That was the
That was
honeymoon.
one of our
Why would
honeymoon
you?
days. I like to do things on vacations
Oh,
too.
yeah. There's something about hotel sex.
Oh yeah, no, it is good. But like there are some people who either they just have boundary crossing plus that hypersexuality, or they have like narcissistic personality disorder or like antisocial where they really don't have guilt and like choosing to have sex outside. But it's not
They
all
don't necessarily
trauma
not
related.
have guilt.
And it's not
That's
all
more
it's not all
sociopath, like-
well that's what I'm saying. It's not all personality related either. There can be multiple reasons for that to occur. But what
Right.
are your thoughts? You're allowed to be different.
She'll
She is
allow
also
it.
a sex researcher, so she knows a lot.
Yeah, we know.
So what's the question again?
I have no idea.
What causes that
So-
that chronic cheating?
Yeah, what
Oh.
causes that, and what are some ways people who have something like that can work through it? So 2 questions.
I guess I would want, if I were to look at it, I'd have to look at it case by case.
Right.
Because I really feel
It's always
like,
case by case.
right,
Sure.
there's so many nuances in every relationship that you really have to just explore it for what it is. So
You don't have to generalize.
I was gonna say, just
some
some-
clients can have this, some have
some
that.
clients do. Some
Yeah.
some clients just really have an impulse control. Some are trying to fill the void, so they fill it sexually. That might have been something that they were taught as a young person, and then they're going to engage it as a means to control.
Yeah.
To feel empowered.
To feel something other
To
than
feel
pain.
something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, similar way
To
to the eating
avoid.
disorder, like
Exactly.
a coping technique.
It could it could absolutely be a coping. And I guess infidelity, if we were defining infidelity as the person not knowing or not consenting.
Right, non-consent. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and it could be emotional or sexual. We always have to
Right.
define it that way
Sure.
because
Right.
sometimes people are just emailing, but because you don't know, it still feels like a betrayal of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. I am, well, and so I'm curious on this piece of infidelity. So, in defining infidelity and sex addiction, well, I guess, what is your stance on sex addiction?
We don't see it as a thing.
Well, we
Okay.
It doesn't
I don't
exist.
see it as a thing.
No,
I don't
she's
see
part
it
of
as a
ASEC.
thing.
They even came out and
ASEC
said
We
and
doesn't
actually
exist.
even the,
So-
like a lot of groups have
Yeah.
come out recently against sex addiction treatment
Exactly.
because it's that shame-based and fear-based
Right.
mentality,
Exactly.
and we like facts.
We like
very
that.
good.
But there are people who, while they don't have an addiction, they are more drawn to sex, and they have a little bit of, they make commitments. That's the infidelity part. They make a commitment, but then they themselves can't keep it. Even though
Yeah.
they'll say, like, no, I really don't want to do this, but they just get those urges and they feel like they're out of control.
Yeah, well, that's that
Yeah.
impulse control that you were
Right.
talking about.
Right.
There's definitely people who
So it's
struggle with
impulse
that.
control.
With
as well.
yeah, struggle with impulse control.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that the community is really polarized and whether or not sex addiction exists. And the people who are really into it, like Patrick Carnes and all the people who are involved on that side, believe that if we were to not call it sex addiction, then we would be dismissing all the people who are impacted by the action. So like the loved ones, the family members, depending on if it involves money where they're purchasing sex. What about all those people?
Right.
I'm like, well, it's still an issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Those people have still been hurt.
Sure. They still want help, but it's just, they don't want to call it that. They don't want
It's
to call it.
because
Right.
we want
Sex
sex
addiction.
positivity, right?
Right.
And so
Yes.
this is
People
where it
generally
comes
are
from.
addicted to vices, and vices are seen as negative, something you're not supposed to do, something culture has told you is taboo, something like drugs, something like alcohol, something like smoking cigarettes, something like sex. And I think that's why they don't want to tie the word addiction to sex.
Well, because think of
Yeah.
even
It's not a
how
bad thing.
like negatively people look at alcohol for addiction, right? It's not the alcohol itself that is evil; it's the behaviors associated with it that become the
Absolutely.
problem.
well, the difference
Right.
between sex addiction and the
I know,
quote
the
unquote sex
chemical.
addiction and alcohol addiction is people who have alcohol addiction. There's a chemical change
Sure.
in their brain It's different. They become physically dependent upon
I understand,
that
but even
substance.
so, like comes from harm reduction training.
Sure.
Like, because we demonize things like that, like sex and alcohol or pot, like then there can't be a space for people to do it in a positive way.
Right.
And so what I see, it's funny, I actually get people after these sex addiction treatments and they have shut down their desire entirely. And now they're coming to me because they have to relearn how to have sex in a positive way. I've had plenty of couples like that, or like people who were ex-priests and ex-nuns, where they were like programmed, you know, from childhood.
Anybody
really
who
to
was
shut down
raised
their
in
desire.
that really like ultra-religious conservative.
I say this often, but abstinence is really bad for relationships. It's really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And every time I've seen it happen, and that's the thing that they suggest in these sex addiction treatments, is they want them to be abstinent until the guy is starting to have wet dreams. And I don't know why. I don't know what. There's probably no research that backs that up. They just came up with that. But so then they avoid sex, and then now they've shut down the way they used to have
They've taught
sex,
their body
and then
to
they
not.
come to me because they're like, we are not having sex at all now, because sex is seen horribly.
Right.
Yeah. They seen it as a vice, something they were to avoid.
Yeah.
And that's why the abstinence-only programs in general aren't a good thing, because you're teaching them that this is something you're not supposed to do. The problem is you can't tell somebody, don't do this ever, and then say, oh, but there's this little caveat over here called marriage, or when you're an adult.
Right.
The reality is you're going to program the person
to
not feel sexual or to suppress those feelings.
When I was a middle schooler, I went to a church, and they had this big celebratory event that they didn't tell anybody prior to it. So we all walked in, and they were like, we just want to let you know that this is the time for you to commit yourself to God and Christ and all of this. And we're going to give you your first wedding gift for the day that you can consummate your love with your husband. And then everybody who believes so rise up and come and claim your marriage gift. I was the only 13-year-old person who sat, because I thought, that is a lot to ask.
It's a lot of pressure.
Somebody. It's a lot of pressure. On the spot. And everybody's like, I'm going to get my frame and I'm going to get my goblet. And I was like,
and that's why it works. Because it's that group thing where people don't want to feel like the only person sitting down.
And so I sat there, and, you know, they came to me and said, did you understand? And I was like, yeah. I just didn't understand.
I'm good.
I didn't understand why I had to make that commitment now.
Yeah,
like
I'm not marrying you.
At 13. Like, who am I marrying? What?
Yeah. What's his name?
What an intelligent 13-year-old. You're like,
no.
Sure. You're like, no,
yes,
thank
it
you.
Wasn't me.
No, I responded the same way. I was the same way. I stayed seated.
It's like, you don't get to tell me what to do.
Yeah. It was so.
It's like, why does Jesus care so much about where my goes? Come on.
I don't know.
I don't think he cares.
Yeah.
He didn't ever talk about it.
And
it was more about fishes than loaves, I remember.
Yeah. He was busy working
he was about,
with the people.
He was saying, don't be to
one
people.
another.
Yeah,
be kind to one another.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So, yeah. And you know what?
Sorry.
And I think in the end, especially when we talk about all of these things, like when we talk about sex education, or we talk about infidelity or sex addiction, or trauma, if it even exists, I think it's the idea that we already as a society put so many confines and limitations and so much pressure on a person to be a certain way and engage a certain way and live a certain way. And sex is always sort of like this other thing that isn't honored or celebrated, nor is your body as like person first honored or celebrated. So having like labels that interfere with that, like sex, like to call it sex addiction, it's like we've already worked so hard.
Yeah.
To
Don't
just say
take
that
us back
sex
to
is
the
okay.
dark ages.
Sex is okay.
Sex itself is okay.
is
Sometimes
okay.
your behaviors around it can be bad.
Right.
But
Like if
sex
you're going to
itself
make a
is
bad
fine.
choice, there's going to be a ramification for it. So, and it, you know, it's just a
That's our last PSA of the night.
Yeah.
It's sex is okay.
Sex is all right, yeah.
The more you know. And with that, we have to end the podcast for the day.
Well, so we want to put in some plugs, right?
So, Angela Schubert, you're at Crossroads Counseling.
I am.
And anything else people need to know about you if they want to get in touch with you? What's your website? All that?
I don't have a website.
You don't have a website. Okay.
No, because I'm a professor. I run a counseling program. And so if you're ever interested in counseling or becoming a counselor, definitely give me a call.
Give her a call.
That's right.
Okay. And my book is coming out, Helping Couples Overcome Infidelity. It's going to be in January 2018. And then, of course, if you want to see a therapist, www.therapistInstlouis.com. Trying to go low. My voice is just cracking like crazy.
And if you come to see her, you get to hear that sultry voice.
We'll talk
all
about
to
sex.
yourself
What did she
for
say
an
earlier?
hour.
Sultry?
Sultry.
Oh,
I was
she
meaning
is-
sultry.
She is so sultry.
I'm sultry. It sounded kind of like slut tree, right? Oh, we can talk about a slut tree if you like.
Anyway, you can find us on iTunes or Google Play. And please give us a review on iTunes. We're going to get that review up there. It doesn't even have a rating yet.
Oh,
like,
no.
You got to get like 100. I don't know.
Oh,
Who
okay.
knows?
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye.